What is the crack, everyone? It is Nathan here, aka the Brambling Kern, and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So I was on Reddit earlier today, and a question came up as to how the Ulster Scots would have dressed around the time of the plantation. So for those who don't know, in the early 1600s, efforts were made by the British Crown to start plantations in Ulster. And basically what the plantations were was a way of, after the series of uprisings and rebellions that had happened in Ireland at the time, to bring in Scottish and English settlers to basically resettle Ireland and get rid of the rebellious tendencies of the locals. There obviously was numerous repercussions to this over the course of history, but that's something for a different day. So the question arose as to how those Scots would have dressed, and if the clothing worn by them would have been unique or different to those that you would have seen in Ireland, England or Scotland at the time. And the question is yes and no. So as previously mentioned, one of the things that happened in Ireland but also in Scotland around this period was that traditional clothing of various types slowly became outlawed. So the Lena, as I've done previous videos on, eventually became outlawed, as was the case in Scotland. So one of the things that we see, and one of the great things for Ireland and Scotland, is that we have an abundance of bogs. So we have a huge amount of actual clothing and full outfits that were found. So the best example for Ulster is the Dungiven costume, and this actually gives us a really unique insight into what sort of clothing would have been worn, obviously, by Ulstermen at the time, but more importantly the cultural crossover that you would have expected to see, and that's why this outfit is quite interesting in a lot of ways. So the Dungiven costume, which I'm going to bring up on screen and you'll be able to see some of the elements of it, consisted of a jacket or a doublet style coat, trousers, a leather belt and shoes, as well as, more interestingly, a semicircular mantle or cloak. This is very in keeping with Ireland of the time. This was the brat, something that I will be doing a video on. I think at this point I may even have to do a video series because it is such a unique and important item. However, it is very interesting to see this being worn in Ulster at the time. Exactly the same as any of the other examples that we have, made in 3 pieces. Generally this was due to the loom width, basically that was how wide wool could be made at the time. So this was found in Dungiven, hence the name. And these items were found, and you'll see through this outfit that it is not that dissimilar from outfits of the time that you would have seen in Scotland, England and Ireland. In fact, one of the things that I was saying that I think kind of gets falsely attributed to this is the tartan style of cloth on the trousers. So this was then kind of later, I believe, referred to as like Ulster tartan, and that was kind of the colour attributed to it. The thing is, this is not really a unique stylistic choice to Ulster. If we go all the way down to the other end of Ireland to the Killery trews and the Killery outfit, which basically a jacket and trousers that were found, you'll see a very striking resemblance between these two. Basically the same sort of checkered pattern on the trousers and a very similar sort of jacket, although this one is a little bit heavier and probably made just for a little bit more warmth in harsher environments. So very interesting to see how similar these are. Now if we move forward slightly, this is when we start to see some of the divergence that starts to happen. So in Ireland in the early 1600s, as I said, many of the outfits, the traditional Irish outfits, were basically being outlawed, and it was very difficult to tell the difference in dress between people across the British Isles. However, there is of course regional differences, and interestingly enough there is going to be stylistic choices and stylistic variances depending on where you are. But one of the things that we do see is this very kind of standard style of clothes. You have your jacket, your trousers or trews, and usually some form of mantle. However, when we move forward, these start to become more unique. By the 1650s, Irish clothing essentially looks identical to that you would expect to see in England, as well as Scotland. In Scotland, however, things start to diverge onto their own paths, and that's where you start to see plaid or plaid. I know Tom Langhorne, Fan Dabidozi, has a fantastic number of videos on this, and it is something that I would love to touch on myself at some point. I'd love to get a version of the Dungiven costume made and kind of test out the differences between that and what was going on in Ulster at the time, or in Scotland at the time. But when we get a little bit forward, you see the, I believe it's the Quintal Hill costume, which is found in Scotland, and again looks very similar. However, we do see one important difference. So the bonnet at the time was the go-to and very popular hat. I've actually done a video on what is traditional Irish clothing, and as I've touched on, the flat cap as we know it is not an Irish invention. It is a English one that was later essentially enforced through law and adopted into Ireland. However, we do see one unique thing in Scotland, is that you have the Scots bonnet, or the Scotch bonnet, if you are a Chile fan. Basically, this is traditionally blue, it takes on a traditional shape, and that is often accompanied with plaid, which creates what we then start to think of as the traditional sort of Scottish outfit, this style that you would expect to see around the time of Culloden. So just a few little notes to touch on as well. There is a portrait, now the name escapes me, of a wedding. I'll put up with the picture here in a second. But you will see in this picture, you can quite clearly see a gentleman in the middle and a gentleman to one side, both of whom are wearing very similar trousers to what we see in the Dungiven costume, and also very similar to what we see in the Killary troops. This kind of checkered pattern, not really a tartan as we kind of know it in the modern day, however it is quite a distinctive style, and I think this is the influence for later styles. But however, this pattern was very popular in Ireland centuries before. It just seems to have kind of stuck around and eventually took on and changed into its own thing. So once again, thank you to those who asked the question on Reddit. Really appreciate it. Kind of gave me a bit of a nice little video to do today. I didn't do any video last week as I was hosting my coach Maxime for a Antrim Bata Irish stick fighting seminar here in Dublin. If anyone is interested to learn more about that, do get in touch. I also do run classes, and I will be posting up a few little videos about that in the coming weeks and months as well. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. If you have any questions about anything that was covered in this video, or of course any specific topics that you'd like me to cover more on, please do let me know. In the next few weeks and months, I have some really exciting projects in the works, so I would love to hit that 1,000 subscriber mark before then, because it will really help me get the attention and get the eyes on the projects that I'm working on. So once again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, do get in touch, and slán.